Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. We're about to start the session. Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to you. All protocol observed. We have incredible panelists with us this afternoon rather. It's morning in South Africa where I'm actually from, so I'm a bit jet lagged. Apologies for that. My name is Eleni Giokos. I am with CNN International. I focus predominantly on business news out of the continent. I'm delighted to be here in Busan covering the African Development Bank meetings. A very important conversation is currently underway. Today we're going to talk about pathways to industrialization. For a very long time, we have been talking about $100 billion of infrastructure deficit that is plaguing the African continent. Africa, at the same time, has many infrastructure gaps, from the first industrial revolution to the second and the third, and now we're even talking about the fourth industrial revolution that has to do with technology. But how do we catch up to what we've already lost? How do we build the roads, the bridges, the power stations, the very important infrastructure to truly push people out of poverty? That is what it's going to take. Commitment, financing, of course. We also need visionaries that are willing to put money where their mouths are to get infrastructure projects underway. We'll also need the assistance from incredible economies such as South Korea as examples of what can be achieved. I know that this has been discussed before, but South Korea in the 1960s had a slower and much lower GDP than many African economies have right now. And look what it's been able to achieve through industrialization. And an incredible opportunity lies now for the continent. Do we go on with legacy infrastructure, or do we leapfrog, creating industrialization, creating a value chain that is more efficient, that is productive, and that is part of the new age conversation, so including technology? That is going to be one of the biggest challenges that will require courage from investors and leaders that are in this room with us today. I have incredible experts with us, so my introduction, of course, is going to pale compared to some of the conversations and insights we're going to hear this afternoon. On that note, I'd like to introduce the gentlemen that are going to be joining us today. Sung Soo Eun, the chairman and president of Afreximbank Korea. We also have with us Mr. Tarek Amer, the governor of the Central Bank of Egypt, and also the African Development Bank governor as well. We have with us the Honorable Minister Al-Amin Ousmane May, Minister of Economy in Cameroon, and also an AFDB, African Development Bank Governor. We have with us Takashi Miyahara, Deputy Director General, Ministry of Finance, Japan, and as well we have the Deputy Governor, the Honorable Deputy Governor, Chen Yulu, People's Bank of China. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to open the floor now to Mr. Eun, who is going to start the conversation for us and put things into context. Mr. Eun.
Thank you. Jumbo is right. I don't know, but my team advised me speaking to Jumbo for the good afternoon. I truly welcome you all and thank you for the traveling halfway around the globe to Busan. The city of Busan was just a small port city unloading aid cargos to help recover from the Korean War in 1950s. Yesterday, Deputy Prime Minister already explained the picture. This small port has now become one of the world's top 5 of the trade ports. This before and after shot of the Busan port shows Korea's miraculous changes directly from the ashes of the war to the 10th largest economy in the world. Yesterday, state dinner, senior Vice President of African Development Bank, we have the same table and asked me, Song-soo, how do you Korea achieve such a miracle? So I want to share my thought with you, and I already explained yesterday, but I just say that it's take maybe 7 days or 7 weeks to explain the factors behind, but within the time limit, I only highlight the 3 important factors today. Let me explain the miracle of the so-called Han River through this formula. This formula is not a complicated or extraordinary one. I think the answer lies in the basic and the principle. It is a role optimization of all the parties in the national economy. In other words, the government, enterprise, and the individuals has done their best part at their own position. First is the government role, good institution and leadership. With strong leadership, the Korean government designed and implemented the optimal and the timely policy goals. In the 60s, the Korean government strongly implemented the export promotion policies, presenting a slogan of sell whatever you can to secure foreign currency. In the 70s, the government pushed ahead with the heavy and chemical industry drive to develop 60 major industries into the nation's key export sectors. They were steel, metals, shipbuilding, machinery, electronics, and petrochemical. Government set up clear vision and target to achieve $1,000, just as $1,000 per capita, and $10 billion of export by 1980s. That was my high school time. So we have a slogan, all the buildings that let's catch up $1,000 per income and $10 billion for export. I remember that was the day. But anyway, let me explain later. But in the 80s, Korea started to prepare for the fostering future high-tech industries and opening the market. The world's best made in Korea semiconductors and the mobile phones have been ready since then. In this way, the Korean government has introduced the right policy objectives and a clear target along with the changes in the economic environment and push hard to achieve the goals. As a result, we could achieve the goal of so-called $1,000 income, $10 billion export by 1977. That was my second year high school. So we celebrate 2010 targeting. You know, compared to this time, it's just very small. But at the time, we just wanted to achieve that kind of target because government pushed and showed us strong vision to the people. Let's get 1,000, let's get 10 billion export. But we are celebrating 4 years advanced than our targeting year. That is the government's role to showing the leadership and a strong vision. In 2017, now Korea stood at the world's 6th largest exporting country. Second is the good entrepreneurship. The good policy of the government can be fruitful only when it is combined with a good entrepreneurship. The Korean government has supported competent entrepreneurs so that they can keep on challenging themselves without limitation. Samsung and Hyundai started off from a very small sugar factory and rice store, respectively. And now they develop into the world's best company in the electronics and the shipbuilding. Their success story began from a great frontier and the challenging spirit of the founder, Lee Byung-chul of Samsung, and Jung Ju-young of Hyundai. Let me start the story of Hyundai. In 1971, Mr. Jung of Hyundai visited the UK to request funding for the constructing shipyard. That is the left hand is 1971, the land of the shipyard, but there's nothing in 1971. But the reality was harsh, as shown in the picture. The British Bank rejected his request, indicating Hyundai had no track record at all. It's true, yes. But Mr. Jung never gave up. He showed the picture on a Korean bill from his pocket and said, "We Koreans made this iron battleship in the 60th century, 300 years well ahead of UK. That is the shipbuilding, iron ship was the famous, so we just put in this iron battleship in the note. But at the time, he bring this note, then showing this. We had strong enough track record. If you lend me the money, we can build the best shipyard in the world. Let me show a bit of the first before that. Yes, that's the right present picture is the Hyundai Heavy Industry, the #1 shipbuilding company in the world, has started from the Mr. Jung's never give up spirit. Speaking of Samsung, when Mr. Lee, a founder, announced the entry to semiconductor industry back in 1980, everyone laughed at him. No technology, small size, no domestic market, weak supporting industry, and no infrastructure were mentioned. Why Samsung would only fail? In fact, they were all harshly true. But now Samsung Electronics, as you know, has become the #1 semiconductor company in the world, posting the operating income of $15 billion in the first quarter of this year alone. This is another business legend. Third, I want to say the human resources. Among natural resources and human resources, which do you think play a more critical role in economic development? Korea had no choice because the human resources was all we had. Government adjusts the education policies suitable for each stage of economic development, just like they did for the industry policy. Then, Korean people studied hard and work hardest in the world to end their poverty and for a better life. Let me explain one funny story about the Korean education fever. You may know or not, the Korean students always stand on the world top best score in the PISA test. You know, the OECD PISA is the program for international student assessment test. Then one of the leader in the one country curious about why Korean student has a high score in the always PISA. Then education minister answered that Korean students studied 8 to 11. Then the leader say only 3 hours per day. Koreans genius, 3 hours per year, then they score top PISA test. Truth is not 3 hours, 15 hours. 11 is not AM, but PM. So I'm sorry but to study hard, but anyway, it's true. Why they want to study hard? Because they want to end their poverty. They want a better life. So that's a student to work hard. And then the workers also work hard. For example, you see some of the pictures in the Deputy Prime Minister's introduction of that. One of the examples is that the nurses and coal miners in West Germany in 1960s and construction workers in the 1970s in the Middle East. This is one of the examples how Korean workers work hard. Of course, definitely they work hard in Korea. Why? Because they want to end their poverty. They don't want to deliver or hand over their poverty to their children. That is one of the why the Korean we achieved the high miracle, because that is there. I have addressed the success factors in respect of 3 key players in national economy. Then the question is the miracle of the Han River formula can applicable to current Africa, so-called miracle of desert, as Deputy Prime Minister mentioned it. My answer is yes. Although the environment, international environment is different from when we have Korea developed in 1960s, well, maybe unfavorable to Africa, I don't know, but the basic principle is still valid, I believe. Taking into account the change in the international economic environment, we can make a new and original miracle of Nile River, Congo River, or Niger River formula, or a miracle of desert suitable to Africa in 2018, utilizing partnership with such as the COAPE. And then let me show you the last picture, and then let me conclude. That is the Korean Peninsula, and then of course the north part is dark, south part is bright. then asking what is the difference between North and South. As you imagine, Korean Peninsula we are Koreans using same language and same culture, everything same during the 5,000 years, but only difference is 60 years. 60 years with difference in the governance and policies, entrepreneurs maybe. So that makes cause that difference. So even in Korea, we have a difference because of difference in the institution. It means that regardless of where you located, what is your language, what is whatever. If you keep the three basic principles like good government, good entrepreneurs, and individuals, then you can or achieve the same miracle whatever you locate in Africa or you locate in the Korean Peninsula. That is my message or one of our tastes to you or everybody. And today, you're asking me about whether we can, what is the meaning of the pathway to the industrialization and financing gap. I want to very shortly mentioning about my answer to the, yes, if Korean is following the first, second, third, or is following the industrialization and government implement and making the policy. But now you mentioned about the first industrial revolution. So whether you can, African country want to follow 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, but it's a good chance we can lift flow. We can jump to not following every stage, but we can have a chance to lift and the first industrial revolution. So we can using this opportunity to jump up to the advanced technology or advanced industry, smart integrated, smart infrastructure. We already discussed in the morning, whatever. And second thing I want to mention, you mentioned the financing gap. Yes, we already mentioned it. Everybody say that, yes, there is a financing gap, infrastructure financing gap. We need the money, we need the private capital, whatever. But in the morning, I mentioned that I work in the sovereign wealth fund, or I the chair of the sovereign wealth fund and the pension fund. You know, we have our own meeting, like CROSAP is one of meeting among sovereign wealth fund. Then we meet together and discuss where we invest. Where we invest in. We have a dilemma or headache because we have a lot of money, but we don't want the money put in the even bank account. We want a high return from our investment. So one part, they discuss about where they invest. One part, MDBs, discuss where is the money. So my answer is there is money, but there's a wall. There's a wall. So if we break the wall, then we can get it combined, and then we can apply this pathway to industrialization. We can get the funding, and we can using this money for the industrialization. That's why African Development Bank play a role to break the wall and bridging the MDB and financing. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Mr. Un. Incredible points there, and we'll definitely be touching on a lot of what you said. But I'm first going to go to the Deputy Governor, Chen Yulu, People's Bank of China. So we know that the China-Africa relationship is so very important. Foreign direct investment into Africa is growing. You look at infrastructure projects across Africa, and somewhere, somehow, China is involved. So it's a very important relationship. Tell me about how you plan to foster this further and your stance and insights.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the South Korea government for the considerate arrangements. It's a great pleasure for me to attend the AFDB annual meetings in the beautiful Busan. In particular, it's a great honor for me to speak at this panel about the African industrialization. I would like to share with you some of my points. The first, industrialization is a pathway to national prosperity and people's well-being for most economies. Both the history of the world and China demonstrate that industrialization is the key to sustainable growth. Since the reform and the opening up, China has been actively pursuing industrialization through tech innovation and the resource allocation. As a result, China has established a complete industrial system and successfully found suitable paths to industrialization. In the past 20 years, Africa has maintained rapid growth. Nonetheless, there are still the great potential for African industrialization. At present, African economies are still dominated by agriculture and unprocessed commodities. On average, African industrial production is $700 per capita, 1/5 of that in East Asia. And therefore, if Africa wants to pursue sustainable and inclusive growth and the goal of prosperity, it must go industrialize. Secondly, based on the late mover advantage and their unique advantages, I think African countries can draw up tailor-made industrial development plans and steadily enhance the quality of industrial development. As the later comers on the industrialization path, African countries have opportunities to learn from the industrial countries' experience and find the right way to industrialization. Resource-based industrial strategy could be set out, aiming at the shifting from exporting raw materials to semi-processed or processed goods, and move up the position in global value chain. In addition, the modern agriculture could be advanced by the widening the use of high-tech in agriculture. Industrial park could be widespread to advance industrialization, attract a variety of production factors, and enhance the intensiveness of industrialization. At present, South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Mali has explored or accumulated some experience in industrial park. Furthermore, African countries could grasp the opportunity of the fourth technological revolution and achieve the leapfrogging development by embracing the emerging industries. The fourth technological revolution, featuring the artificial intelligence, clean energy, and robotics, is now changing the global industrial landscape. African countries can use this opportunity to develop the green industry and the digital service and blaze a new path of industrialization. Thirdly, the African countries could reform their economic structures, mobilize the domestic resource effectively, and create a favorable environment for industrialization. Africa maybe needs to expand the capital expenditure, improve the efficiency of taxation, and ensure the fiscal and debt sustainability. Meanwhile, the financial environment maybe needs to be improved so as to efficiently use savings. In particular, the local bank's lending capacity and the resilience could be enhanced. Meanwhile, developing the local financial markets and the development of financial institutions and the industrial development funds. Fourthly, integrate into globalization and make the best of comparative advantages. American countries with abundant natural resources, young and dynamic labor force, can become the active players in the global cooperation. They can collaborate with the international capital and multinationals, bring their comparative advantages into the full play, and enhance their competitiveness by introducing technology and innovation. Fifthly, the international community shall shoulder the responsibility to help Africa with the industrialization. And China would like to play an active role. In the 2016, the G20 Hangzhou Summit put forward the G20 initiative on supporting industrialization in Africa and least development countries. So the G20 has made a serious commitment to the Africa that a new industrial revolution will benefit this continent. At the Johannesburg Summit, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in 2015, the President Xi Jinping announced the 10 cooperation plans with Africa in industrialization, modern agriculture, infrastructure, finance, etc. Premier Li Keqiang also supported and proposed that China and Africa will jointly build high-speed railway, highway, and regional aviation networks. Up to now, the cooperation between China and Ethiopia, Kenya, Cameroon, and other African partners under the Belt and Road Initiative has made substantial progress. In September, China will host the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in Beijing. Both of our leaders will gather together again to draw a blueprint for our cooperation in this new era. With equal consultation for our mutual interests, we will together promote exchange and cooperation in all areas, deepening our comprehensive strategic partnership, achieving our mutual benefit and development at a higher level, and injecting the new impetus to South-South cooperation and the industrialization of Africa itself. To conclude, welcome to Beijing in September. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Deputy Governor, for your time and for your insights. An honor to have you with us today. I know that you are engaging in very important meetings to bed down as many deals as possible. So we thank you very much for your time. I know you need to leave, so we thank you very much for honoring us today. We're going to continue our conversation, and Minister May, the Deputy Governor had alluded to Cameroon and the very important relationship that is playing out with China. I know that Cameroon is focusing on the National Industrialization Plan that will hopefully increase its contribution to GDP from the current 13% to 24% by 2035. You're focusing on agro-processing, you're focusing on energy, and you're focusing on the digital economy as well. Take us through some of the things that you're perhaps drawing from China, the examples of speeding up industrialization that you're going to be able to implement in Cameroon.
Thank you, Diakos, for recognizing me. But let me first of all seize the opportunity to thank our host and the African Development Bank for making this platform available for us to express ourselves and share our experience. Before talking about our experience deriving from inspiration maybe from China, as you said, I want to get back to the equation with respect to Korea, which is the miracle formula. This miracle formula encapsulates the main important ingredients that could lead to development. But I would like to add one thing at the same time. Each country has its own specificities, and it should act on these different factors such that it can push its own development. What are we doing at our level? And without reducing the importance of each factor, starting with vision, Because as they say, knowing your destination is half a journey. If you don't know your destination, you will end up anywhere. You need this destination, first of all. Second, you need a very strong political will to push into this direction. Third, you need stability. Why? Because development is a long-term journey. And without stability, you will not make the journey. Even if you have the resources, even if you have the human capacity, human resources, you need the stability to implement properly the policy, the vision, and the action plan that will lead to the success. We are conscious of the importance of human resources. As it was mentioned, individuals are key. We also want to believe that for a state like ours, infrastructure is determinant. Why? Because without infrastructure, we cannot open up markets. Without infrastructure, we cannot reduce the cost of production. Without infrastructure, we cannot manufacture the raw materials we have. If we go the road of infrastructure, while addressing the issue of education, we'll be able to meet up the target at the end of the day. And this is the reason why our country has elaborated a strategic document for growth and employment, and additionally, we have our industrialization plan, focusing on infrastructure, energy, ICT. These three pillars are very important for us. ICT, we don't need to go the same route other people went. We can take advantage of technology. And this is what will catapult, what will push our nation faster to the destination we are contemplating. Of course, ICT is there to help do business differently. It's there to help interconnect our continent, our countries with the rest of the world. This is why we put emphasis on ICTs. Energy, why? Because industrialization without energy is not possible. We are blessed with natural resources, be it dam capable of producing huge amount of megawatts, and this is necessary to supply energy to the industries we are going to implement. We are doing it with the support of the Chinese corporation, the Korean corporation, because it is important to have these investments. If these investments are available, if you have ICTs, if you have roads, ports, you may be able, with good business climate, to attract foreign direct investors. And my last point is about finance. Finance not only about sovereign debt, finance not only about PPPs, but finance also about private equity. Why? Because the formula is sending a message about entrepreneurship. Private equity has this particular characteristic. It's about money and much more. Money there, but managerial assistance, interconnection, commercial support, opening up different horizons to the companies where private investors have put money in. This is in supplement to what can be done with government, with private sector through PPPs, but I just wanted to put more emphasis on private equity because it's about business. And if you don't have the right skills, if you don't have the right population of entrepreneurs, all the opportunities available will not be used adequately. So the formula is a very strong formula, I think inspiring one, but each country has definitely the role to adjust the different elements of the formula according to its own situation.
And Minister, seeing this formula, because I mean the African miracle, that's what we all want to see. Will you be able to take that formula and adjust that equation to suit Cameroon, to tweak it for the country?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Let me clearly say it to you. We are probably capable of having now individuals who are being trained using the opportunities offered in terms of education. But Certainly, we don't have enough entrepreneurs to take advantage of our resources. Therefore, we need to attract investors coming from abroad. We need to develop more investors locally, and this will fit the formula and make it stronger. Government is doing its own part of the job, but it's not sufficient. We have to build strong institutions. We have to clearly design the destination and offer the regulation as well as the business environment that will make business easy. This is what we are doing with the help of the private sector at the level of the government, because we have a platform of discussion. More importantly, and this is the purpose of having these sessions, for instance, we are opening up, we are learning from outside, we take what other people have done within 50 years, and if we can do that within 5 years, we have been benefiting from their experience.
Is that a target?
Definitely.
5 years?
Definitely.
Isn't that ambitious? I think we need a clap there. Governor Amer, I mean, I was actually going to follow up and say, in so many instances, when I travel around the continent, I sometimes feel that it's a Sisyphean task to achieve true industrialization and fill the infrastructure gap to, and as I said, pull people out of poverty, because that is the most important thing to do. How do you feel about, firstly, how far Africa as a whole, and I know that we're made up of many countries, has performed, and where do you see spots of true and significant progress that keeps you excited about what is happening in Africa?
Okay, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the host, the hosting country and its senior officials for receiving us here, and they have been quite an interesting couple of days, and the African Development Bank as well. I think what I've noticed in our conferences in general, whether in Europe or here, we speak about the subjects themselves, and we don't give some time to the surrounding environments and the human errors. I recall this movie of Tom Hanks when he landed with the airplane in the Hudson River, and he saved the people, but they told him you could have reached the airport because the simulator says so. Yeah. But he told them I couldn't have reached, and they found out that they've ignored the human factor. He took him some time to make the decision. So on reality on the ground, it is different. The challenges are different if you talk about industrialization or any economic progress. And from my experience, and like His Excellency the Minister said, of course the direction is very important. We need to know where we want to go, because if we miss on the direction, and I'd like to go back to the way the decision-making takes place in governments, in some governments. How does the decision-making on a project or a plan take place? And if you, my experience when we talk about let's do refineries, let's do big roads, let's do this dam, let's do that. And if you try to examine how did this come up, it didn't come up based on a comprehensive view and assessment, first of all your financial resources that are available and the alternatives that you have in front of you. Usually a project will come either recommended by a specific sector in government, and this sector only sees its own sector. So they will not look into the opportunity cost of investing such funds in something else. So if we invest in a $2-3 billion refinery and we are going to employ 1,000 people, okay? While this money could have been spent in a much more conducive and productive project where it can create multiplier into the society and really address poverty and unemployment in a better way. So, or a supplier will come and propose a project, and then it will be a reaction. Or a project will come from upstairs due to a political sentiment. So this is one challenge, is that I see that in many cases we don't lack the financial resources, but I don't think we are using the financial resources in the right manner.
So we're overspending essentially.
Sorry?
We're overspending essentially on many of these projects.
Spending the money not in the
Right.
optimal manner, because everybody has limited financial resources. In Europe, every country has a limited. Financial resources are not infinite, but you have to see how you want to optimize. In Egypt, the history was that we invested a lot on industry, in the private sector and the government sector, and I think the performance was not good. The private sector businesses, and I've seen this like 20 years ago, that we were putting capital, that as a finance person, I saw this capital is being thrown in the ground because it was importing machinery, importing raw materials. So it was not sustainable for financial stability and for your balance of payments. So the more you do this, you endanger financial stability, you put pressure on inflation, you put pressure on currency, and every 10 years we fall into a currency crisis.
Yeah.
Something is wrong here. But it's very few people realize this. And people don't understand why are we every period of time falling into crisis, despite we are investing very quickly into a certain, in the government sector, industrial sector, and the mismanagement of the industrial sector, these are legacy concepts that it takes communities tens of years to migrate out of it. Privatization and convincing the communities that we can bring efficiency through privatization, etc. But even this you cannot do. I'm sorry, the subject is quite complicated, so
No, please.
I will. Even this you cannot do except if you have enlightened and educated regulators. And in our emerging economies, and they were historically socialistic economies, the concept of regulatory bodies was not advanced. And the exposure to this is not there. And it is very important to set the tone and keep the standards for the protection of the communities and for the protection of the invested capital, to make sure that there are regulators to monitor the economic activity, the trade activity, etc., and also to prevent corruption. Because corruption is one of our enemies, not because of the money it wastes, but also because corruption, especially in government authorities, hinders the capacity to support the investment and the investors so that investment can flow smoothly. And this is a challenge because if you don't have the environment for the domestic investor or the international investor, it becomes a slowdown, a big slowdown. So even if you want to invest, and we say we are for the private sector, and even if you have financial resources and a banking system that can provide, but the licensing process is a challenge. And if you want to have industrialization, and this what brings me back that we're talking about, we have to start with education. Because if you are investing and you don't have the skills, we have unemployment in Egypt, but our private sector industries cannot find skilled labor. So we always prefer to invest in machinery, but not in people and training. Always training is taken as a secondary thing. because the machine produces. But we don't see that an individual is our greatest asset. And over 30, 40 years, the banks have been financing machinery, but refraining from financing talent. So if I have a clever engineer or a clever graduate of physics school, etc., who can produce something substantial, because the best return on an investment is the investment where you have a talent and technology in the product. And our problem in industrialization is that we've been creating industry based on imported technology, and we thought at a point of time that this might be a stage, but we did not have the development in research and development and connection with industry, and we have the economists think about the whole plan together. And if you look at governments when they operate in underdeveloped countries, sometimes you don't see this coordination and harmony. And you cannot have industrialization, you cannot ask the Minister of Industry to create industrialization alone, because he needs other responsible officials and authorities to operate with him. And the bureaucratic government organization is a great hindrance. So to go forward, it is simple, but it is not easy, okay? And it takes, like the minister said, political will. Political will and support, because this is a reform, and this is transformation. This is transformation of a method of governments operating, and governments are responsible for the environment and for the policies. So private sector will not be able to operate in an organized manner unless the government is setting the scene properly. So you need harmony, and you need teamwork and cooperation, and you need a holistic view about the direction, and also you need to make sure that whatever we are investing is not digging for ourselves into a hole, that we are investing in a manner that can create value for domestic assets and for the local currencies, and for to improve the levels of inflation, which at the end of the day is always the concern of the population, and high inflation really is a very big enemy against poverty. This is quickly
Incredible
my
points.
view about challenges. I don't want to seem pessimistic, but I'm saying
It's a
these are
realistic.
the challenges that we are trying to break, to tackle and attack, and to make sure that we correct our path as we go in order to achieve the industrialization that is everybody is aspiring for years and haven't taken place yet in some of our countries.
Absolutely sobering and I think realistic. Thank you very much for those insights. Because it's important, I actually just want to go back to the minister here, because the minister was talking about simultaneously doing a lot of the things that you've been alluding to. But from what I'm understanding is we don't have deep enough pockets. We need to prioritize the money that we do have onto certain things, and big ticket items are not as important as focusing on things as education and investing in the human capital of a country. Minister, what do you think? I mean, can you do it simultaneously, just taking away from the realistic and very sobering approach that the governor has just mentioned?
I want to believe we don't have any alternative. We have to address all the issues at the same time, maybe with a different intensity. Why? Because if you say, based on the resources available, I will just address the issue of education. What will you say about health? What will you say about water supply? What will you say about telecommunication? This is the reason why a plan is important at the beginning. Once you have set the plan, you also distribute the rules and the responsibility. If the government, as my friend from Egypt, the governor said, is concerned about education, it will concentrate its resources on education, while making available and possible for private sector to invest in energy, to deliver the resource needed to promote the development. Otherwise, it will take probably not 10, 20, 50 years, but probably a century. And we know what population are expecting, especially nowadays. They want to get to development as quick as possible. They want to have not 2G, but possibly 5G immediately. So the expectation is high. The pressure on the government is high, but the government is not and will not be able to do everything. It has to focus on regulation, enabling, policy, and leave the private sector plays its role. Then we may be able to address the industrialization and development process. As he said, there are some hindrances all over the world. But how do you address, how do you implement proper decision-making process, proper policy implementation, and stability in the long run? Stability of institution, stability of organization, stability in the society, stability in the policy, because all these are crucial for the implementation of the rest.
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Miyahara, Japan is an incredible example of industrialization. I guess you're dealing with the opposite of what a lot of African countries have been dealing with, a bout of deflation, an aging population, and so forth. But at the same time, you're a beacon and an example of incredible progress. Having heard some of these comments from the governor, from the minister, what would you say the best equation, the best formula to industrialize the continent?
Well, thank you, Eleni. And first and foremost, thank you very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak in front of us. And I would start with apologizing that my minister, the vice minister, had to cancel the attending this session on some unexpected things. So that's why I'm here. But I try my best to talk on his behalf. And then Eleni gave me very challenging questions to answer, and I also tried best to capture some of the points of interest of you. But I understand that the discussion between the two ministers, governors here, kind of relates to how the government can do everything at the same time, or any other sequencing or the prioritization, and is not avoidable. And in that regard, when I look back to the Japan's recent history of industrialization, well, first of all, according to the economic scholars, the industrialization of Japan started several hundreds years ago, and some people say, well, it started 400 years ago, or after the Meiji revolutions, about 150 years ago. But with my limited knowledge, I would set my scope of discussion at the things after the World War II, and then as for the Japanese industrialization since then, meaning the last 70 or 80 years. And I think Japanese economy took a sequencing approach, at least retrospectively, sequencing approach to raising the level of industrializations up to the current level. Not too ambitious enough to do everything at the same time. And with my prepared note, I would like to share some of the findings about the past the 70 years in the Japanese economic history, and if you may have some interest in that. And in late 40s or early 50s, meaning right after the war, the Japan started with concentrating the scarce resources. Then the resources were truly scarce because right after the war, and we didn't have the money, and especially the foreign currencies. We didn't have the minerals and the other the resources, natural resources, and so. The Japanese economy had no other options but to to just concentrate everything on the most needed stuff like the producing the steel and other raw materials, or producing powers, and developing the minimum level of infrastructure. And then, so during the 1950s, well, things went well with the collaboration among the government and industries and financial institutions like big banks, all together. I mean. Perhaps to the extent not violating the antitrust law, I believe, but they collaborated closely in those years. And then with such corporations, then the Japanese economy has obtained a certain level of success in building the minimum infra or growing the heavy industries like steel or the raw materials, and then the power generations, and then so that prepared the stage for the Japanese economies to move on to the next level, where the economy started to produce the cars or electric appliances and other not so heavy but not light consumer goods, and then. Again, I cannot come into the detail, but again, it was the generation at that time was lucky enough to obtain some success in growing the successful industries, the car industries, electricities. Then. What benefited the Japanese economy at that time was the sort of the global trade system, which was getting more and more free, open, and freer, and sort of interconnected. So in the phrase these days, the international, the value chain was emerging, at least in the Japanese view at that time. And then the Japanese economy was able to take advantage of coming into such international value chain and to exporting our goods to the consumers to the rest of the world, and then so that was able to prepare for the even higher stage. So at this point, the Japan still recognized the big and important value of maintaining and free trade and investment system. We are unchanged at all about that point. Then. There was about the 60s or 70s mainly. Then in 80s, then the Japanese economy had, entered into the sort of next phase in expanding the industry into a more varied variety of directions. With reducing the reliance on the cars and electrical appliances and such limited big industries. perhaps promoted by the need for shifting into the more profitable area, or I'm not sure, but.
But you're saying that Japan didn't actually do things at the same time, right? You said that it wasn't perhaps ambitious enough to do everything at the same time, and it took a very long time to get to where we are today.
At least retrospectively, that was
retrospectively, exactly. It wasn't intentional. There was a plan, but it didn't happen all at the same time. I know Mr. Un wanted to interject on that point.
This question is very important and interesting. Everywhere we face this question, whether we can at the same time as a sequencing and priority, because everything is important. For example, the health, education, infrastructure, so many things important. So whenever we have the meeting in for example, African Development Bank or World Bank, IDA money, so we have a meeting together and we select the priority.
Yes.
Then later they say, oh, gender is important. Yes, gender is important. Agriculture is important. Agriculture is important. Infrastructure, water, sanitary, whatever. Then later we found the 50 priority. 50 priority, 100 priority is not the priority. But this is, we already everything important, but we cannot.
So what did Korea do then?
But no. That is the point. Is the same thing. Is that we have limited resources. If we have a lot of money, then we can do the 100 priority. But we only small money, limited money. So now later, then we need to inevitably choose priority 1, 2, 3 priority. Then that will be developed later and later. So. It is inevitable. In reality, we don't have such sufficient money, so we need to choose what priority.
So what would you choose? What do you think is important?
Korea's case? Yes, we just starting, okay, let's also promote, boost the manufacturing sector.
Manufacturing,
sector. Then maybe later back, so compared to the entrepreneurship and the workers, government later there's sorry for the workers because some kind of sacrifice worker, cheap labor. But now looking back, the worker is very important. We need the human being important. But at the time, government say, okay, we want to use cheap labor cost to promote manufacturing. So later the government apologized for the workers, but later that. But in the 1960s, we have not sufficient room to apologize the workers, so we can promote the manufacturing. Then we expect that, I don't know whether the trickle down from the, this is, I don't know if it's useful or not, but we say, if there is a manufacturing is succeed, it will trickle down the workers and agricultures and other things. Sometimes we are arguing if it's work or not, but anyway, the policy is that, okay, let's push the manufacturing, then we hope that other industry or maybe we improve the sanitize, improve the agriculture, improve the health, infrastructure, whatever. So that is my point. But I want one thing about the mentioning the Cameroon governor about infrastructure, adding to my formula. So I fully agree with the infrastructure is very important for the developing economy. But the question is that in the 1960s, even in Korean cases, whenever we construct the high-speed railway or airport or port or in the freeway way, then there is a big argument whether we need to construct freeway after we secure sufficient the demand. That is one question.
So you want to secure demand before you embark on these big infrastructure
because
projects?
we don't want to lose the money. So if we have toll road, if there is no more the cars, then we can lose the money. So one argument is that, okay, let us waiting until the car is increased,
too many
cars and to collect the toll. The other one is that, okay, if we construct the road, then we can create new demand. I don't know which one is right or
chicken or egg.
There is a big argument even in the Korean case. But looking back to Korean case, we can say that Korean government decide construct in advance. It means that there is a big protest by the opposite party. Opposite party arguing that why you construct a road, railroad, airport without any sufficient demand? Then there's suspicion that the government may be connection with the constructor. Maybe has some bribe of the construction companies. Then opposite party, arguing the ruling party or government. But government will say, okay, I want to create a new demand. So government construct the freeway in 1960s. Only few or 3 cars a day, but anyway. But later then, it's create new cars and promote the trade from Seoul to Busan. because it's connected to Seoul to Busan. So it's they accelerate the trade activity because they can easily to access to Busan port from Seoul metro. That is one of the success story of the Korean economy. Later then, we invest in the telephone. Telephone is not common in Korea, but we advanced invest in the 1980s. It is, I think, it is the basic for the Samsung mobile phone. I believe that. Or we construct an airport earlier. Anytime when you construct a new project, there is suspicion and protest about the new project because there is sufficient demand. But later, I don't know whether you arrive in the Gimpo, I don't know, or the Incheon airport. Incheon is a huge, nice airport. But when you construct the Incheon airport, there's a huge demand and the protest whether it's not sufficient. Now, we construct the second, third airport in the Incheon airport. So I don't know, it's different to the individual country, but in Korean case, I can say Korean government very brave to construct the infrastructure in advance. Of course, you don't have sufficient money, you borrow the money. I don't know, it's a good one or not, but thank you.
Okay, I have to ask this because I've been speaking to so many locals. Is it true that you are supposed to stay at school until 10 o'clock at night? You mentioned this, I think, in your Do children really stay at school until 10 o'clock at night?
Me is 12, midnight.
Midnight?
Yeah, but why did I mention 11?
I cannot believe it because, I mean, children are supposed to also sleep. When do they sleep? When do you sleep? Do you sleep?
No, not.
No, okay.
So I bring that, I have in a high school,
yes.
I bring the 2 lunch boxes.
2 lunch bags, of course. 3, I would take like 5.
Yes. No, 2 lunch boxes for the lunch in the lunch, and I eat another lunch box at the dinner time, and stay at the school and the 12 o'clock.
So this is the focus on education that you're talking about that is going to be very important to become a truly competitive economy. Do you think that African economy should be looking at this model? I'm glad I'm out of school when I'm asking this question.
One thing is that why because kids stay at the midnight. Basically, I think our system is that we can easily mobilize the social status.
Yeah.
Because if you keep the high score in the high school education, it is recognized by the nationwide. I think the same as Japan. And then
same thing in Japan.
Yeah, same thing in Japan. Then recognize Japan. Japan is bigger than Korea, but bigger, smaller than. So in that case, it's high school. In the high school, everybody knows that. Then he can be easily picked up by the rich family or easily picked up the university or government can guarantee for the better life. So even for me, even in the elementary school, then I said, okay, I want to get to high school and showing my name in the world, in the nation, and become the rich guy. Anyway, I partly succeeded. I'm the chairman of the Action Bank. So that's why. So everybody very compete because they wanted to show in the high school. I'm sorry, but that is true in the past. Then now it's still, I'm sorry, the high school student or even the middle school student, and they study very hard. For example, my son, he was Daddy, I want to go outside at midnight. Why you go at midnight? Because we can see his friend at only midnight. Because until the midnight, everybody has to go on their own homework, whatever. So it is only they allowed to meet midnight. I'm sorry, but it is. I'm sorry, but
no, I mean, I feel totally
let me ask him whether it is relevant for the economic development or not.
It's an important part of industrialization, it seems.
I don't know.
Minister May, I mean, do you think, let's talk about education. How much money do we need to invest in this? How important do you think it is in your national industrial plan? How much money are you going to plow into it? And are children in Cameroon ever going to be working until midnight, do you think? Or are you going to get protesting mothers in the streets?
Let me quote, first of all, and then I will switch to French.
Yes.
It's more painful to live in poverty than to work hard.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if this is the case, I do want to believe that we have to build the culture of hard work. Otherwise, we'll not meet up our targets. Jokers, vous avez souhaité avoir quelques éléments sur ce que le Cameroun fait en matière d'éducation. On dirait on ne fait jamais assez pour l'éducation parce que les ressources humaines sont la principale richesse de chaque pays. La Corée est un exemple. Are you getting the translation?
Yeah.
La Corée est un exemple que nous voulons suivre. Et c'est pour cela que, sur la base des engagements internationaux, le Cameroun accorde une bonne partie de son budget, entre 5 et 7% du PIB, à l'éducation. Ce n'est pas suffisant, mais l'éducation, ce n'est pas seulement l'apprentissage des connaissances. L'éducation, c'est le comportement dans la société, c'est l'état d'esprit au travail, c'est certaines valeurs et principes qu'il faut avoir pour travailler convenablement et produire les résultats attendus.
And to attain the results that we want to. And I believe that this is the direction we should follow. And today's world will be a world while human resources, if they are not extremely skilled, they will not have a good chance of finding a job. This is why education is so important. Because the people who are going to be properly educated will be given the options to make some decisions, and they will be enlightened, and they will be able to make the right political decisions. If there is an alignment between people's expectations and the vision of the politicians and the participation to the implementation of the plan, then we should attain what we want. Now, in relation to the priority choices, we have to set ourselves apart from what we have done beforehand, to have a new mindset. If formerly we just worked with doing everything one at a time, we're just doing the sequential work, we have to think about doing it differently. For instance, we have to work in collaboration, and this is why I say this because the expectations of human beings have changed. And have changed in such a way that people want to get faster. You know, technology implies speed. Cars are going faster and faster, so we are following this rationale of going faster. So it's difficult to say to young people, okay, this is our priority, we have to wait 30 years to attain it. So we have in politics, we have a combination of the public policies and the private sector policies, so as to be able to attain and to meet people's expectations. This is what we believe in terms of our developmental policy in Cameroon, because we have to see things holistically, and we don't have to see things fragmented in a fragmented way, because we are focusing on education using ICTs. We can go fast in trade if we use ICTs as well. We can go fast in industrialization, taking advantage of power which is provided by the private sector. It's certainly going to be difficult because the resources are scarce, but it's precisely because it is difficult. This is the reason why we need skilled human resources, quality human resources to make the right decisions. So this is the input that I'd like to give.
And I think that is, we definitely need to round of applause for that. Thank you, Minister. That was fantastic. I actually, you know, on that specific point, education, I mean, something that if you look across the continent, there are children in the most remote of areas that don't have access. And then we're talking about the youth population being the African dividend, but then they're not employable. Then you talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and then you've got youth that are unemployable. So it's going to be so important to the story of industrialization. And maybe the pathway to industrialization isn't just focusing on the big power plants that are going to light up the continent, not just the roads, not just the railways, but focusing it from bottom up as opposed from top down. Governor, would you concur with that? I know that this is what you had been alluding to in your opening statement. Let's talk about specific things that we can focus on, that we, you know, a vision, a plan for the continent that we can implement.
Okay. It will not be uniform. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to challenge the concept of industrialization
Yeah.
in itself. Is this, who decided that this is the right thing now? Yeah. Is it because China and Korea and the other countries have done so well? And does it make sense to go into this race today? Is there something else that could differentiate us? It depends. Some markets, maybe services sector is the better position for the services sector, for finance, for logistics, for transportation, for tourism. Let me ask you, if we look at the UK today or some of the European countries compared to Germany, for instance, in terms of industrialization, would you say that they've done well in industrialization? The UK is a financial center. So,
but Governor,
I think
I'm going to interject there.
we always take certain concepts and just everybody keeps repeating them and we run with them. I think they need to be tested.
Can I ask you this? Can we do away with, and I get what you're saying, but can we do away with no roads, no railways, and no power stations?
This is not industrialization.
Okay.
You're talking about infrastructure.
Infrastructure,
and
yes.
My
but
view on infrastructure, my view, infrastructure, you cannot go full-fledged investing in infrastructure and then you wait for industry and all the users to come over the years. So you've invested so much in advance, like the chairman of Exim Bank said, you can't do that. You have to pace things together because you have limited resources.
Yeah. But the value-added sectors, so the manufacturing.
So
you want to focus on agro, but you can't get the goods to market. You want to focus on agriculture, but you can't store the goods. You can't process the goods.
Well,
right?
I mean, I will not make a highway to send like 100 tons of products to market.
Okay.
You need to measure and assess financially the visibility of this. Okay? We are not saying no, yes, but each specific small project has to be assessed based on its own merits.
Director General, Mr. Miyahara, yes. What is your view on this?
Industrialization.
Industrialization versus the infrastructure spend that goes with it versus the value-added sectors that are required when you have the abundance of raw material like a lot of African countries have.
Perhaps separately from own history in the last 70 years, but I still believe that rushing to do everything at all time, could not lead to the grand success. And so phased-in approach should be inevitable, I think. Then when it comes to that, infrastructure comes first. And not only physical infrastructure, but also, the ministers, governors, you talked about the investment in the human resources, and then I think that's what the Japanese government was doing in the 50s or 60s when we were kind of rising, and what they did, all together. I mean, the infrastructure building and something. And so physical infrastructure and bringing the people, children into capable and skillful adults, and growing the middle-income earners who could serve as the stable consumer of the products or services produced domestically, and that sort of infrastructure should come first. And then next step we should should be varying depending on the countries and where the country is located or historically situated, and so I couldn't tell which should come as in the second stage, but in that sense the investment in human resources and very basic infrastructure building, that should go together. And then, but which industry comes next as as a source of earning money. That may depend on the countries.
Brilliant. Yes, Governor.
Something here. Because we have to look at what Africa has differently, and we say that Africa has agricultural land, it has water resources. So if I talk about industrialization, I would focus first on agro-industries. Develop agro-industries fully integrated in a big way for export purposes, for local production, etc. And I think then you are starting from a base of value that exists already. But do we go and try to manufacture Samsung mobile phones in Egypt to compete with Samsung here? Doesn't make sense, even if we have financial resources for it, where they are already there. We have to look what we have in our environment as a strength and build on it, but not try to imitate everybody else, just imitation. So we have to be very, very specific about the industry we want to address.
Brilliant. Minister, did you want to jump in? I see you want to jump in.
Just to bring in the disruptive factor.
Yeah.
Why? Because we attempted to, in the case of Korea, was very eloquent. We may think of a competitive advantage to start thinking of industrializing the agro sector. Fine. And it also has a certain consistency with the Maslow pyramid. We need to feed people first, and then add value and sell. I want to believe that thinking about it does not prevent us from thinking about the opportunities beside. If I have the capacity, the requirement, the prerequisites to do both agriculture as well as ICT producing phones, because technology has come close to me, I will not leave it because it is high-tech. The future will be high-tech value products. Where do you stand? If you don't prepare yourself for this destination, while preparing yourself, of course, you need to take advantage of what you already have. You will not ask somebody to build a dam where there is no river. If there is a river, it makes sense to build a dam and take advantage in terms of industrializing. We have this possibility, and we'd like to add extractive industries. We have resources. We could industrialize a step further in the extractive industries because the resources are there, but we send them outside the continent without adding value. This is room for industrialization. Besides agri sector, because we have arable lands, we have products, and we can add value using resources, human resources available. So I want to probably suggest that when it's about taking advantage of opportunities in terms of industrialization, we should think out of the box.
Definitely. Rwanda actually produces laptops and has gone into an industry that is fascinating, attracting companies to produce there. We have many automotive assembly plants in many countries across the continent, but we still import all our clothes, food, we import our technology, we import a lot of things. So that would form part of that conversation, because how do we become competitive in those spaces? Maybe, Mr. Hoon, you'd be able to enlighten us how you become competitive, drawing on some of the mistakes that South Korea has made through those years, and then keeping in mind what the governor has said as well. We should see what we have and then capitalize on that, or do we look at what the minister says, we've got to jump in and try and become competitive at the risk of failing?
When I listening to the governor and ministers, partly I agree with the both of the gentlemen, and then it is easy to get a competitive advantage because compared with the Japanese, my colleagues mentioned in the 1960s, 70s, it less library, and we are lucky. Korea is lucky to compete because sleeping China or
sleeping China.
I don't know.
That's a brave statement.
But nowadays China is very influenced.
It's very awake.
Yeah. So if from the perspective of African country, they use the library were competent in the outside. It's very difficult to get the competitive advantage. But anyway, yes, the governor mentioned that the African continent has a lot of resources, especially in the agriculture. Agriculture is a basic income and nutrient to the kid and whatever. So I think in partly one of the ideas is to basically starting to the agriculture, not for the export or not, but anyway. And then using the ICT technology in the agriculture sector, then you jump up the value added in agriculture. So in the partly you roasting the agriculture and the partly using the ICT technology in the agriculture, whatever. And I think wherever we can expect then what about our future of AI? And then we just thinking about what is the last job? Because everything is replaced by the AI. Yeah. But what is the last job in the world? I don't know, but anyway, human being must eat, regardless of whatever. Yeah. So agriculture is maybe a last resort, I don't know, but using the AI. In the sense that the African continent has the advantage of using huge the resources, land, and high technology. Mixed with that's basic. And then, for example, and I say that when Samsung manufactures mobile, then Samsung needed to sell their item to farmers. Because basically, without any income from the agriculture sector, Samsung cannot sell themselves. So they need a consumer. Consumer come from the agriculture sector, starting point. So partly I agree with them that using the ICT technology is very important. Using that, very difficult to work the technical advantage or advantage in New. It depends on the country, but basically, compared to the, what's the thing is the human being is also an investment, and the starting point is the cheap labor force is one of the advantages.
Cheap labor force, you're saying?
Yeah. So wherever you are employer or unemployed, but unemployment is high, it means that labor cost is cheap, then have a competitiveness advantage compared to the Korea or now in China or other
and
Singapore.
Then all the industry will come and converge on the continent.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open the floor to questions. We'd love for you to get involved in the conversation, share your insights, please introduce yourselves, the country you're from, the industry you're with, and then who you would like to pose the question to. We do have a roving mic that is on standby. If we could get that microphone, thank you, sir. Can we start with this gentleman over here for me? We only have one microphone from what I'm understanding over there. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Please stand up for me. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ambu Chaturvedi. I would like to thank the African Development Bank for this session. It's been very invigorating, and usually I don't last for more than 15 minutes, but I had to sit and hear the entire discussion. I'm from India, and we work in India and Africa. Of late, it's a comment, and it'll probably follow up with a question. Maybe you can help me find it. We are developing an industrial park near New Delhi. And an industrial park, it's about 250 acres of land, in the middle of nowhere. And I was speaking to a lot of people that how do I develop this? How do I make it into a ecosystem, a modern industrial ecosystem hub? And one of the main points which came up, which resonated with what the governor from Egypt said, the people said, look at the anthropology of the area. What is the values? What is the culture? What are people up to? And if it's mainly an agricultural belt, then you cannot have a defense factory set up over there where people will manufacture high-tech missiles. So I really agree with what you're saying on one part. But overall, I just also wanted to thank you for this discussion. It's been very enriching. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was another hand up. Sir, over here with the red tie, please. Over there. Oh, there's two microphones. This gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sylvester Kasuku. I'm the Director General and the Chief Executive Officer of Lamu Port South Sudan Ethiopia Transport Corridor. That's the LAPSET corridor in East Africa. We do appreciate this great discussion that is taking place here. But first and foremost, for the industrialization of Africa, we are appreciating a few facts that are today taken to be globally given. That technology has changed work processes globally, and the wheel has already been invented in many ways. That number two, Africa already has a huge population comparable to China and India. And that growth of Africa's industries will not be purely African, but will attract global investments within the continent. That only requires appropriate climate setting in governance, infrastructure, energy, human capital, security, and policies and regulations. And therefore, we arrive at the doorstep of what to do, that we should draw up globally acceptable policies and regulations within the continent that can attract investments into the continent. That number two, we should build world-class infrastructure that can attract the investments that are needed in Africa at the industrial level. And to do this, we must also agree to break up the unsurmountable boundaries that we put across each of the countries within the continent. If you have over 50 boundaries that you have to cross to go through the continent and to be able to do trading and invest in industries, this is indeed self-entrapment. And we must, at the same time, improve security, because not really any investor would be interested in the continent if you are not assured of your own security or even the security of your own investment. Therefore, these are a must-do for us as Africans. And as such, we must therefore build human capital so that we do not complain that those who come to invest import with themselves labor as well as expertise. So as Africans, going forward, calling upon the rest of the globe to join us in this, the fourth industrial revolution, we must indeed lead from the front, lead from policy, regulations, infrastructure, among all other climate setting items.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. There's a gentleman here. If we could just keep it concise. I'm just trying to get through as many people as possible. Gentleman over here. I just want to see show of hands. Anyone at the back here? Okay.
Maybe I will try to speak in French. So, le premier message, c'est que je suis Moubarak Loh, je suis conseiller du Premier ministre du Sénégal.
I'm advisor to the Prime Minister of Senegal. There is no development without industrialization, and there's no development for Africa without industrialization. We spoke of this. You know, in the past there was liberalization, and with the rise of China, Africa was not competitive, so Africa seemed to have dropped industrialization. Now China is outsourcing, and regional integration is developing, and it is a factor of industrialization, and there's also education and other aspects. And the third item is, and I'm supporting here what, I'm concurring here with our friend from Cameroon. There are three dimensions. There's the government, there's the companies, and you have the human resources. And within all these, we have several variables. I have reckoned 11 variables in addition to those that His Excellency the Minister mentioned earlier on.
Thank you so very much for that. Other hands. I just want to see who I'm... Oh, there we go. The gentleman over there. There's quite a few hands. If I could please keep it as short as possible and just questions. There we go. 4 people. Sir.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Roger Kalua from DR Congo. I'm delightful and thankful to all the panelists for the insightful sharing they've made. And before I ask my question, let me make a point. 7 years before I was born, my dad graduated. He's an engineer. And if you look at this picture, he got 2 classmates. One is a Korean and another one is Egyptian. Today, when I'm landing in Korea, in the Philippines, or in Sydney, everyone is talking to me, telling me about remise à niveau, which means that my education level doesn't fit the market. It doesn't fit the market. So my question is going to His Excellency, the minister, as well as to the governor from Egypt. Il existe un autre, excuse me, I'm gonna shift to French. Il existe un autre combat auquel l'Afrique est livrée, celui de la mauvaise gouvernance, evasion fiscale.
There's, of course, lack of transparency, lack of security systems. Speaking of an Africa that will take things in its hands and industrialize and emulate the good examples of China, Korea, and other countries. Your Excellency, Minister, and myself come from a continent that has over 70% of farmland that would allow the continent to feed itself and feed the rest of the world. I'm delighted that you would be sitting, normally would have been sitting there with your colleague from Congo, but you can share with us now on what has already been done. Of course, I am in full agreement with what you said there in your presentation on what is required, on what needs to be put in place. But could you tell us here what sub-Saharan African countries have done on the way of having Africa taking its future in its hands, and also by way of emulating Korea and China. We're talking about the labor force in Africa. So what are you doing now in Africa for the next coming 10 or 15 years?
Two more hands. Please keep it as concise and short as possible. Yes, this gentleman over here, the one there. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Chibuike Uche. I'm Professor of Governance at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And my question is to anybody in the panel. And I've listened to these very interesting presentations. And I was just wondering, some of the research coming out from my university shows that by the year 2100, Africa will have about 4.5 billion people. Now we have 1.2 billion and we can't feed them. Can we industrialize without addressing this when the population of Africa is out of control? Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Next question. Over here, the gentleman over here. And then the lady at the back. Whoever first, no problem, whatever you prefer. Give it to the lady first. There we go.
Thank you very much. We have a true gentleman here who's allowed me to ask my question. I'm Aline Blomberg from the African Development Bank. My question to the Honorable Governor from Egypt is, what can a country like Egypt do for a country like Cameroon in the spirit of South-to-South cooperation to improve industrialization? And my same question to the Honorable Minister of Cameroon, what can a country like Cameroon do for Egypt that is going to help accelerate industrialization for both countries and the continent? Thank you.
And then the last question, this gentleman here.
Yes, good afternoon. First of all, to express, I'm Rogério Zandamela, I'm the governor of the Central Bank of Mozambique. Express our gratitude to the host, the Korean host, and the African Development Bank for making this possible. I listened carefully to the different point of views from panelists. I don't have specific comments, but I have a couple of questions. One for Governor Tarek Amer, and another one for the chairman of the Exim Bank, Mr. Sung Su. For Governor Tamer, you had a very somber diagnostic about what has happened in Egypt over the last few decades in terms of financial foreign exchange crisis, pretty much every decade. You invest, you spend a lot of money, and then you deplete your resources, and then suddenly you have another crisis, and then you start all over again. My question to you now, as a policymaker, what are you doing different now to avoid that trap, to fall into the same trap? Is anything being done so that you don't repeat the mistakes of the past? That's my question. To the chairman there, you mentioned very briefly the international environment, how relevant it's for industrialization and economic development. Of course, that has changed from the time Korea has decided to move on to industrialize in the 60s, in the 70s, and perhaps in the early 80s. Now it's a total different world that we are living in. It's a much more challenging world. Where trade, it doesn't play the same role. Every country is now looking at itself. And the question, how relevant is that international environment for further industrialization? How difficult it will be for, let's say, today? If Korea today were to decide to begin the process of industrialization in a current international environment, what will be needed? What will be the challenge? Will it be the same? Will it be more difficult, easier? And that's the question I'd like to put. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. What a pleasure to have you with us today. Much appreciated for those thoughts. Okay, we've got lots of questions to go through. Just very short points. Industrial parks was mentioned. It's a fascinating topic. We're seeing that across the continent. Policy, education, Cameroon to Egypt, Egypt to Cameroon, and then, of course, the question on Egypt's troubles through the years and then how one recovers from that. And then, of course, to you, Mr. Un, that was also interesting. How would South Korea start on that? Who would like to begin? Mr. Un?
I'll start. If I'm missing, please let me know. Okay. Just starting from the last to the first. Just a question about the international environment is, of course, definitely different in the 1960s, 70s. One thing is, as my Japanese colleague mentioned, in the 1960s, 70s, we are benefit of the very favorable trade system. And also, at the time, I believe that United States is very strong and very rich, is very generous. So welcome to Korean export items without any protests or whatever. So we are benefit. And that counts. And then also sometimes we have lower interest rate and lower oil price, and that is very good, favorable to the Korean economy development. So we have benefit. Now you are totally different, and the United States still, I don't know, they're not that generous, and or other international environment is not generous too much. So they strengthen the protest or strengthen. So maybe it's not negative or unfavorable to the African my colleagues. But good news is that, of course, at the time, we don't have any COAPEC meeting. But now we are COAPEC. We have the African continent has a cooperation with China, cooperation with Japan, and the cooperation with Korea. And also, we have some example of the experience. We can share our example, so better. Then at the time, we only rely on the Japanese cases, so we don't have. So that is good news, and bad news is the tough international environment. But good news is, I think, bigger than the bad news. So I hope that Africa emerge like Wakanda, as I mentioned in the dinner speech and the toast and soon. Then the South is the gentleman. Regarding the population, yes, yeah. Just I mentioning about the population, huge population blessing or not. Of course, if the African population grew up to the 4.5 billion, then considering the job creation, it's not the following job creation, it's maybe not a big blessing. But in the past, since the 16th, 70s, Korea also we expect huge population. So maybe every family had 6 or 10 children. So we are worried about the huge population. So that's why government adopt very strong birth control program. So this program is too much effective. It means that now Korea's birth rate below the 1. So now we need to promote more baby. So to me, I think 4.5 the population is not the disaster. I think you can using this huge population for the, you mean that population dividend, and you can use it. Of course, if somebody worry about whether you can hire that huge population, but it is your job to create a new job, and that's why industrialization is needed to hire more population. And I believe that kind of the population dividend is a blessing to the African continent.
And so you're saying promote baby. I like that. It's very diplomatic.
And lastly, I just want to say that the industrial park, I want to just mention about industrial park in Korea. Of course, we use establish industrial park. Of course, there is some advantage of the kind of saving cost in the one place, and the logistic is the one place is a benefit, and of course, government to provide some cheap land to the factory, or sometimes give the tax incentive to the factory, or maybe we can promote FDI, foreign direct investment. We introduce the foreign direct investment in the industrial park, bring the technology, or the Japanese companies come to the Korean industrial park. We benefit. So definitely, I think still the industrial park is useful. And then it is related to the second question: how then attract foreign direct investment? That is also still a relevant question to every country. Tax maybe is relevant, or security, or whatever relevant, but then compared to the think about from the perspective of foreign investors, then the interest is that they want to secure their own job and they want a high return from their investment. Yeah. That means that we can think about how can attract foreign direct investment. There's, as you mentioned, there's many things that are relevant. Security, transparency, even the corruption, whatever. Tax may be relevant, but most important thing is maybe transparency, security, and yeah, that is one of the best important thing is that. So as I concluding that the FDI is very important, and in the park, and you need to attract more FDI with technology. Yes. That is relevant and increase the board, boost the industry, and you can create more jobs. Then you can observe the huge population. So you can, everything is relevant in the same thing. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Governor.
Okay, thank you very much. There are a few questions here. My issue is really that we in Africa, including ourselves in Egypt, we always want to build world-class things, you know. We are in love with building, you know. We build the pyramids. And over years, the Egyptians would say, we want a national project, we need to build, and we don't need to build that. One of our colleagues here was talking about building, we need world-class infrastructure in Africa, okay? I think this has to go gradually. We don't need world-class infrastructure now. We need to build discipline and to know how to operate our living affairs, how to operate the roads that we want to build, how to operate the way we are working. It is the most important thing, the discipline, the attitude, the hard work first, before just we are investing in a road or in a project in machines. I think we need to. That's why I'm saying we need to invest in the way we live, the way we think about many things, in educating the children, our children, and so the discipline in the environment. I used to tell one of the rich business people at the time of Mubarak, he was a politician, every one of you is building a big castle for himself and surrounding it, and he has everything for his children and making money, whether in the right way or not the right way. And the rest of the environment is much below standard. Yeah. You might find some roads that are not very clean, or you might find the trucks going in the wrong way, threatening life of people. I told him, you will not be able to protect your son because he will go out of the house, he will drive in this environment, and he can be hit by a road that's going in the wrong direction. And if he doesn't die, he may go to the hospital and does not find blood, or maybe finds contaminated blood because there is no discipline in. So, but in Europe, I lived in England for 2 years, everybody has a small place, and the environment is very good for everybody. So this individualistic approach, so we need first to have a discipline in the way we are organizing our life, and with accountability for policymakers, for officials, for the authorities, and teamwork, and I think we have to think in a way that we are in trouble, because the question about that in the year 2100 will be 5.4 billion. So we have then to realize that we are in trouble. And there is no time to be wasted. Industrialization is not by buying machines. Industrialization is by developing talent and expertise and education and skills. So this is one point I wanted to make. Another struggle is the lack of transparency and security. Africa taking things in its hands to industrialize like China. What has already been done in sub-Saharan Africa? This is a question for sub-Saharan country in economic development. This is, I cannot answer this as well. But concerning the people, in 2010 and in Egypt, we have this crisis, and people have to be aware. And one of the questions, what did you do in Egypt differently? What we did is that we gave people a wake-up call. Like, it's enough. It's enough depending on government. It's enough that you are not taking matters in your hand. It's enough that we complaining of unemployment while 90% of the graduates have a degree of a mark of pass, and not A, not B, not excellent. How do you expect to get a job when you have not worked hard in school? And if you didn't work hard in school, you expect to get a job, and you don't have the attitude. When you go to work, you lack the attitude. Even when we give you a job, it's the attitude, how serious you take things. Life is a serious matter. And this is the change that we did in our environment in Egypt, is that we confronted people with the reality and that they have to take responsibility, and we hit them with 100% depreciation. They lost half of their savings and they lost half of their purchasing power, and now they're starting to manage a budget for their household after they going to cafes every night. It doesn't matter, it's cheap. So no, you have to be responsible. And you have to understand that we are embracing reform is an ongoing matter. And it's not about screaming or doing demonstrations, because everybody is going to lose. So it is about being open and honest and outright with the people, that we cannot continue living the way we used to before life was much better and much easy. I think this is the most important achievement. What can Egypt do for Cameroon? What I'm sure, and Cameroon do for Egypt, I'm sure a lot. I'm sure if we are not entangled in our daily problems back home, and coming here, it's been a very hard decision, because, but if we can provide some time to look into each other's affairs, I'm sure there is a lot to be done. But from my what I've seen, there has to be trust. There has to be mutual trust. I think the politicians have not done a very great job in terms of bringing us together. The meetings were not enough. But I feel that it is important that there is trust. There is trust, and that we work together openly and with the feeling that we are working for the common good. And I tell our politicians in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when you go to a country and there are matters, it is very important that you always have to strike a fair deal. It is important. It is not smart to try to outsmart your counterparts. It is important, and to be successful and to be rewarding on the long run, you have to be a fair counterpart. And you have, like we learned in banking, you cannot sell a product to a client unless he really understands the risk of this product. Ethically, you cannot sell him a product that you don't think is good for him. You cannot overprice him. And we know about many instances when the regulators really penalized. So this is, I think, our new generations are different, and they can do different job better than the job we have done so far, but the communication is not there, and that's a challenge. Thank you.
Governor, thank you very much for that. Minister, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you once more for giving me the floor. La première intervention
I believe, came from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You expressed concern about the fact that when it comes to governance and tax evasion in our countries, this could be challenges in some of our countries. Yes, it's a reality, and let me say right away that certain measures are being taken. In Africa, if you want to compare Africa of 30 years ago and today's Africa, when it comes to governance, there is some significant development that can be reflected in free and democratic elections, in choosing leaders, which also reflects this determination to progressively improve the context of governance. It is something that is ongoing. It's not perfect. It has to continue. It requires that the population should be more involved and that the actors should be adequately trained and informed in order for them to take the good and possible decisions. One thing you said when it comes to tax evasion is indeed a very fundamental concern, because in the States we need resources that are mobilized domestically for our budgets before we start envisaging indebtedness. Countries in our sub-region, which are committed to fiscal conventions both internationally and domestically, with the support of the OECD, IMF, the World Bank, so that our tax resources are retained in their venues of generation instead of being lodged where businesses that are operating in our countries are incorporated. This is something that is happening and is going to continue, so that there will be this fiscal cooperation internationally, so that there will be less evasion and more resources for our countries. What are we doing? I believe that the dynamics which should be in Africa globally is, of course, integration. Integration which requires that each country, each state, every population should try to look beyond its own borders. We should not limit ourselves just within our national borders. We need to start looking more in the sub-regional and continental level, so that we can do trans-border trade and do things in cooperation. The ECAS countries, and DRC Congo is a member with, of course, Cameroon. We are working towards reinforcing such cooperation for a better future. The future of our continent can be built partly on agriculture. With 65% of arable land, it is certain that when it comes to the positioning of Africa, when in the area of production, agricultural production will be essential. That positioning will enable our continent to draw investments and do a new agriculture that will be more intelligent in order to meet the needs of the world, certainly.
The second question was about the future of the continent. 2100, we may have 4.4 billion people. This is a question coming from the professor from Leiden, I think. I will have two answers. The first one is based on, I will say, positive thinking. 2100, I will not be there, certainly. But I want to trust that human beings are endowed with intelligence and capacity to adapt to any situation. Based on that, I want to think that they will find the solutions, if they happen to be 4.4, to cope with this amount of population. But what do we say now, today? The concern is about sometimes feeding these people. And feeding these people will not be based on traditional agriculture anymore. I want to think it will be based on smart agriculture in the future. Smart agriculture will lead to better management of water resources, land, production, storage, and so on and so forth. And these people, we should not look at them as only part of the continent, Africa. Maybe we'll be in a world where interconnection, connectivity is reality, full reality to its full extent, which means even if they are based on the continent, they will be in interaction with the rest of the world, therefore offering their capacity, therefore offering their labor, and being able to get into the world development process. This is probably thinking from paradigm of the past, while not mastering what the future will be. The third question about South-South cooperation. I want to say that right now, I happen to work in the banking system, and companies from Egypt have been operational in my country, Arab contractor. They happen to be financed by banks in Cameroon. This is already interconnecting, integrating, and working together. We have to go a step further. And this will be based on greater movement and easy movement of people. The African continent has decided to go into a free economic zone, continental. But we have to act on it, ease of doing business, with non-double taxation, with policies that will help, fiscal policies that will address all these concerns that will prevent investors from both countries to move from one country to another, while trade is already taking place. Why do we need that? Because we have to open up markets. We have to know each other. We have to see where the opportunities are and take advantage of these opportunities. If we have barriers, this will not take place. And this is where I believe, even if today we have not reached industrial cooperation, we are working on trade cooperation, there is room for growth, for industrial cooperation, if we open up properly, if we give better incentives to entrepreneurs, to investors to go to Egypt or to come to Cameroon. It is certainly the way to help joint venture create. It's certainly the way we also want to contribute to the high fives of African Development Bank, because we are talking about lighting, powering, nurturing, feeding, industrializing, integrating, and improving the living conditions of the populations. So integration is critical. We have small-sized countries with a limited market capacity. If we don't join efforts, we will not be able to open up our markets and create critical size that will attract investors who could therefore produce and sell on the market. This is the contribution I wanted to make and share. Of course, we want to further continue thinking about all these problems. There is no clear-cut solutions that will fit every day the problems we have raised. We need to adapt permanently. We need to be agile. We need to be flexible. We need to see problems coming and anticipate and work together to address these questions.
Thank you so very much, Minister. Deputy Director General, over to you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'll make 2 points very quickly. The one, in response to the Governor Amel's mention on the on how to operate infrastructure, which may matter even more than developing infrastructure. And that's exactly the point which the Japanese government has been promoting under the initiative, our initiative of the high quality infrastructure development. And yes, exactly. Without a people who can operate in an effective and efficient manner, the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure themselves would not serve the people, well enough. And our assistance in the infrastructure development to our partner recipient countries, should entail the support as necessary for the skills training of the people in the recipient countries, so that they can operate the infra in an expected way. And so please come to Japan when you are serious about skill training or to operate the infrastructure in a sustainable manner for many years. And the other point I would make is about the population explosion, which a question from the audience touched upon. And I heard it with the great envy, as a person who now lives in a shrinking population. And but in the past, Japan experienced the big population increase to some extent, if not explosion. And then, if my memory is correct, at that time, what matters much in the policy arena was how to of course address the potential or actual poverty coming from the population increase in a household or in a community. So what mattered there was income redistributions.
Yes.
And indeed our Japanese policy emphasis on the universal health coverage, which my boss, Vice Minister, mentioned in the morning session, is about the income redistribution. I mean, helping the poor family or in a community, helping them out of the poverty coming from out of medical expenses. So in a sense, that policy relates closely to the or broadly summarized as the income distribution policy. And what is happening in Japan now is we have an increased number of aged people and then smaller and smaller number of children and young people. But still, the young people tends to have although gradually the smaller amount of income. It's kind of deep-rooted problem of the Japanese economy in the last 10 days or even now. And then the elderly people generally has a lot more wealth on account. So one of the many policy issues now the Japanese government has been tackling is that how to shift the sort of excessive wealth from the elderly people to the younger people who are in desperate need of the money or liquidity or whatever. So income distribution issues can occur in various situations of economic development or the social development, I think. So well, my general comments. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to give one anecdote before we leave. Now, I've been speaking to a lot of locals. That's what I do. I'm a journalist. I'm on the ground. I speak to people. And I know, Mr. Owen, you were saying about promoting the baby, right? You want more kids. I was asking people on the ground, why do you have this problem? Why don't you want to have kids? Guess what the answer was? I'm so traumatized that I was at school until midnight, and I worked so hard, and I actually don't want to bring a child into this world that has to compete so heavily and work until midnight.
No, I don't know.
I'm just putting it out there. If you want to promote the baby, people need to have time to have a baby.
I don't know whether arguing about the population policy in here or not, but as I mentioned in the past, the same as Japan, and you worry about the poverty due to the population explosion. So government has a slogan. Government is always effective, Korean government. So slogan is one family, two child.
Yes.
So it's a slogan. So people follow the government slogan. Okay. So starting from the 4, the 3, 2, and then now the more effective than government expected. So
I'm just saying, my anecdotal evidence might be right. I mean, you guys maybe need to relook this thing. Kids working until midnight, you're traumatizing them. But it's very important to be competitive globally. I'm not underplaying that. Ladies and gentlemen, please a warm round of applause for my incredible panelists today. We have Sung Soo Eun, the Chairman and President of Exim Bank Korea, Tarek Amer, the Honorable Tarek Amer, the Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt. We have the Honorable Alamin Usman May, the Minister of Economy of Cameroon, and of course we have Takashi Miyahara, the Deputy Director General, Ministry of Finance in Japan. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and your evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very exciting.